Standing in my kitchen, holding the court papers with trembling hands, I read the unthinkable words again. My own parents were suing me for buying my dream house on Maple Street, claiming I had unlawfully acquired property rightfully belonging to their daughter, my sister Sarah. The same sister who had disappeared from family gatherings for 2 years, who never returned calls, who acted like we were strangers. Now suddenly this beautiful 3-bedroom colonial I had saved for 5 years to purchase was somehow hers. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife ever could. My name is Freeman, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed I understood my place in this world. 28 years old, working as an automotive engineer for a major manufacturer in Detroit, living the American dream one paycheck at a time. My parents, Martha and Robert, raised Sarah and me in a modest ranch house in suburban Westland, Michigan. Dad managed the local branch of a credit union, while Mom worked part-time at the elementary school cafeteria. Growing up, our family seemed normal enough. Sarah, 2 years younger, always had a creative streak that our parents encouraged. She painted, wrote poetry, and dreamed of becoming an artist. I gravitated toward mathematics and science, spending afternoons building model airplanes and taking apart electronics to understand how they worked. The differences between Sarah and me became more pronounced during our teenage years. While I worked summers at the local auto parts store and delivered newspapers before school, Sarah spent her time at art camps and music lessons that our parents somehow always found money for. I never questioned this arrangement. Sarah had talent, and talent deserved investment. College brought our first real separation. I earned an academic scholarship to Michigan State University, supplementing it with work-study jobs in the engineering lab and weekend shifts at a campus restaurant. Sarah enrolled at a small liberal arts college in Vermont, where tuition costs exceeded my entire yearly expenses. Again, our parents made it work, though I noticed Dad picking up evening shifts at the credit union. After graduation, I landed my engineering position and moved to a small apartment near the Ford plant. Sarah's college experience proved less successful. She changed majors 3 times, extending her 4-year program to 6 years before finally graduating with a degree in studio art. The additional tuition created stress I could see in my parents' faces during Sunday family dinners, though they never complained. For the past 5 years, I had lived with laser focus on a single goal: homeownership. Every overtime hour, every side consulting project, every dollar I could spare went into a dedicated savings account. I sold my vintage guitar collection, drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic, and ate packed lunches while my coworkers ordered takeout. My friends thought I was obsessive, but I had learned the value of persistence from watching my parents stretch every dollar to give us opportunities. The house hunting process had been both exciting and frustrating. I viewed dozens of properties over 6 months, each one either too expensive, too small, or in need of major repairs I couldn't afford. Then my realtor, Janet, called about a listing that had just come available on Maple Street. The 1950 colonial sat on a 1/4-acre lot with mature oak trees and a stone fireplace that drew me in immediately. The seller, an elderly widow named Mrs. Henderson, had maintained the house beautifully. Original hardwood floors gleamed under afternoon sunlight streaming through large windows. The kitchen featured updated appliances, but retained its vintage charm with subway tiles and glass front cabinets. 3 bedrooms upstairs provided space for a home office and future family. The basement offered workshop potential that reminded me of my grandfather's garage, where I had learned to use tools. Mrs. Henderson accepted my offer of $225,000 after minimal negotiation. My down payment of $30,000 represented exactly 5 years of disciplined saving. The mortgage approval process went smoothly thanks to my stable employment and excellent credit history. Closing day felt like the culmination of every sacrifice I had made since college. Moving into my own home created a sense of accomplishment I had never experienced. I invited my parents over for dinner that first weekend, proudly showing them every room and sharing my plans for gradual improvements. Mom admired the kitchen while Dad examined the basement, nodding approvingly at the solid construction and updated electrical system. 3 days later, Mom called with questions that seemed oddly specific. Where exactly had I gotten the down payment money? Did I remember what we had discussed at Thanksgiving 2 years ago? Had I been saving longer than I claimed? Her tone carried an undercurrent of suspicion that confused me completely. The Thanksgiving reference particularly puzzled me because I had worked overtime that entire holiday weekend, missing family dinner to meet a critical project deadline. My team was launching a new transmission design, and I had volunteered for the extra hours to demonstrate my commitment to the company. I mentioned this to Mom, but she insisted we had talked about something important that day. Sarah had been notably absent from my housewarming dinner, though I hadn't thought much about it at the time. She rarely attended family gatherings anymore, claiming work conflicts or other obligations. Her art career had never gained traction after college, and she seemed to drift between various jobs without finding real direction. Our conversations had become increasingly superficial over the past couple of years. The court papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who apologized for the early hour. Reading the legal language felt surreal. My own parents, Martha Daniels and Robert Daniels, were listed as plaintiffs in a civil lawsuit claiming I had wrongfully obtained funds belonging to Sarah Daniels through deceptive means and familial manipulation. The specific allegations centered on my down payment of $30,000, which the lawsuit claimed represented money that rightfully belonged to the defendant's sister as promised inheritance from their deceased grandmother, Dorothy Mae Patterson. According to the filing, I had knowingly and willfully appropriated these funds despite clear family understanding of their designated recipient. Grandmother Dorothy had indeed passed away 3 years earlier, but I had no memory of any conversation about inheritance money. She had lived modestly in a senior community, and we had assumed her small estate would barely cover final expenses. The timing made no sense either. How could I have stolen inheritance money that supposedly existed 3 years ago when I had documented proof of earning and saving every dollar over 5 years? The betrayal struck me at multiple levels. Not only were my parents questioning my integrity, but they were doing so in the most public and humiliating way possible. The legal action suggested they truly believed I was capable of theft and deception on a massive scale. Everything I thought I knew about my family's opinion of my character suddenly seemed questionable. The Hamilton County Courthouse buzzed with typical morning activity as I climbed the steps for our first hearing. I had decided against hiring an attorney initially, convinced this misunderstanding could be resolved with bank statements and mortgage documentation. Surely once a judge saw my meticulously kept financial records, the absurdity of the allegations would become obvious. My confidence evaporated the moment I entered courtroom C and saw the other side of the aisle. My parents sat rigidly beside Sarah, who wore a black dress that made her look both vulnerable and determined. Their attorney, Patricia Williams, projected an air of polished competence that immediately intimidated me. Her expensive suit and leather briefcase suggested this case was being taken seriously in ways I had not anticipated. Judge Margaret Foster called the proceedings to order with the businesslike efficiency of someone who had heard thousands of family disputes. She reviewed the basic allegations and asked each party to present their initial positions. Patricia Williams rose first, outlining Sarah's claims with precision that suggested extensive preparation. According to the attorney, my grandmother Dorothy had made a specific promise to Sarah during a private conversation 6 months before her death. This promise involved $30,000 that Dorothy intended to give Sarah for establishing her adult independence and pursuing her artistic career. The money was to come from a combination of life insurance benefits and savings that Dorothy had accumulated over decades of frugal living. Patricia Williams continued, explaining that Dorothy had shared this promise with my parents during a family dinner, creating what she termed a legitimate expectation of inheritance that Sarah had relied upon in making life decisions. The attorney argued that I had somehow learned about this promised money and had deliberately saved the exact amount over 5 years, creating a paper trail to disguise what was essentially theft of my sister's inheritance. When my turn came to respond, I felt woefully unprepared. I explained my savings plan, my work history, and my complete ignorance of any promised inheritance. My words sounded weak compared to the structured legal arguments I had just heard. Judge Foster listened politely but seemed more interested in the documentation than my verbal explanations. Sarah's testimony proved devastating in ways I had not anticipated. She spoke softly but clearly about her struggles after college, her difficulty finding stable employment in the art world, and her growing financial dependence on our parents. She described grandmother Dorothy as her closest family confidant, someone who understood her artistic aspirations when others questioned their practicality. The alleged promise had occurred during a hospital visit, Sarah explained. Dorothy had been recovering from pneumonia and was concerned about her mortality. She had taken Sarah's hand and promised that $30,000 would be available to help establish her career after Dorothy passed away. According to Sarah, Dorothy had specifically mentioned wanting to help her granddaughter avoid the financial struggles she herself had experienced as a young woman. Sarah presented a handwritten note, supposedly from Dorothy, written in shaky letters that spoke of love for her artistic granddaughter and intentions to provide financial support. The note mentioned the specific amount of $30,000 and encouraged Sarah to follow your dreams without worry about money. The emotional impact of Sarah's testimony affected everyone in the courtroom, including me. Her tears seemed genuine as she described her disappointment when Dorothy's estate appeared to contain no special provision for her artistic career. She had assumed the money would be revealed during the estate settlement, but nothing materialized. Then came the devastating connection Sarah drew between the promised inheritance and my house purchase. She had noticed the coincidence of amounts immediately when our parents mentioned my down payment. $30,000 represented an unusual sum for someone my age to save, particularly given my known expenses and lifestyle. She became suspicious that I had somehow gained access to money Dorothy had intended for her. My parents' testimony wounded me more deeply than anything Sarah had said. My mother took the stand with obvious reluctance but spoke about her concerns regarding my sudden ability to afford a house purchase. She mentioned conversations with Dorothy where my grandmother had expressed worry about Sarah's financial future and her desire to help both grandchildren achieve stability. Mom's testimony revealed details about family finances that I had never known. She explained how they had been supplementing Sarah's income since college graduation, providing several $100s monthly to help with rent and living expenses. This support had strained their retirement savings, making Dorothy's promised assistance seem like a blessing that would ease their burden. My father's testimony proved even more painful. This man who had taught me about integrity and hard work spoke about his growing suspicions regarding my savings ability. He calculated that my known salary, minus typical living expenses, should not have allowed me to accumulate $30,000 in the time frame I claimed. He suggested I might have received money from Dorothy without telling the family, possibly through manipulation of an elderly woman's affections. Dad's words stung because they questioned not just my honesty about this specific situation, but my fundamental character. He implied that I was capable of taking advantage of my grandmother's generosity while allowing my parents to struggle financially to support Sarah. The accusation painted me as selfish and deceptive in ways that contradicted everything I believed about myself. The hearing concluded with Judge Foster requesting additional documentation from both sides. She wanted to see complete financial records, details about Dorothy's estate, and any other evidence that might clarify the competing claims. We were given 3 weeks to gather this information before the next hearing. Walking to the parking garage after court, I felt emotionally devastated. The people who knew me best in the world apparently believed I was capable of theft and elderly exploitation. Even worse, their belief seemed based on careful consideration rather than momentary anger. They had hired an attorney and were pursuing legal action with determination that suggested absolute conviction in their position. That evening, I sat in my kitchen reviewing every document related to my home purchase. Bank statements, pay stubs, savings account records, and mortgage applications told a clear story of disciplined financial management over 5 years. Every deposit could be traced to specific work activities or asset sales. The timeline was consistent and verifiable. Yet doubt began creeping into my own mind. Had I somehow forgotten a conversation with grandmother Dorothy? Was it possible she had given me money that I had rationalized as my own savings? Could my parents and sister be right about something I had convinced myself was false? The next morning brought a revelation that changed everything. While reviewing my savings account statements more carefully, I noticed something that had escaped my attention during the hearing. The monthly deposits showed a completely consistent pattern that reflected my actual income and expenses. More importantly, the statements revealed that my savings had actually exceeded $30,000 by several thousand before I used the money for my down payment. If I had somehow stolen Sarah's inheritance money, why would I have saved additional money beyond that amount? The extra savings represented months of continued discipline that would have been unnecessary if I already had access to $30,000 through other means. This detail seemed to support my version of events, but I realized I needed professional help to present my case effectively. My evening was spent researching attorneys and preparing for what now appeared to be a serious legal battle. The family I thought I knew had revealed fractures that ran deeper than any single disagreement about money. Trust had been broken in ways that might prove irreparable, regardless of how the court case concluded. Michael Thompson's law office occupied the 10th floor of a downtown building that overlooked the Detroit River. His reputation for handling family financial disputes had come recommended by 3 different sources, and his initial consultation revealed why. Within 20 minutes of reviewing my documents, he identified several inconsistencies in Sarah's story that I had missed completely. The first problem involved timing. Sarah claimed Dorothy had promised her $30,000 6 months before her death, but Dorothy's medical records showed she had been suffering from early-stage dementia during that period. Hospital documentation from the pneumonia treatment Sarah mentioned revealed that Dorothy had been confused and disoriented, often failing to recognize family members. Michael ordered a comprehensive investigation into Dorothy's estate records, which revealed troubling discrepancies. The original probate filing listed assets totaling $47,000, consisting mainly of checking and savings accounts, plus a small life insurance policy. However, bank records showed that Dorothy's accounts had been systematically drained during her final 18 months, with regular withdrawals that exceeded her monthly expenses. My own financial investigation proved more straightforward but equally revealing. Michael's forensic accountant traced every dollar of my savings back to legitimate sources: overtime pay from the Ford plant, consulting fees from weekend projects, proceeds from selling my guitar collection, even small amounts from returning unused vacation time. The pattern showed consistent discipline rather than sudden windfalls that might suggest external funding. The most compelling evidence came from my employment records, which documented my work schedule during the Thanksgiving weekend when Sarah claimed we had discussed Dorothy's inheritance promise. Payroll records showed I had worked 16 hours of overtime that weekend, with supervisory confirmation that I had been physically present at the plant throughout the holiday period. Michael then shifted focus to Sarah's financial situation, which raised immediate red flags. Despite claiming financial hardship, her recent credit card statements revealed expensive purchases that seemed inconsistent with someone struggling to pay basic expenses. Designer clothing, frequent restaurant meals, and regular cash advances suggested access to money sources beyond her reported part-time employment at a local gallery. The investigation into Sarah's living situation provided even more puzzling information. She resided in a luxury apartment complex where monthly rent exceeded $2,000, far beyond what her gallery income could support. The lease had been signed 8 months earlier with a substantial security deposit that would have required several $1,000s up front. When Michael requested Sarah's bank records through legal discovery, the pattern became clearer. Regular deposits of $1,500 appeared monthly from an account linked to my parents' names. These transfers had been occurring for over 2 years, representing financial support far greater than what my parents had implied during their court testimony. Confronting my parents about these discoveries required courage I wasn't sure I possessed. Michael advised approaching them privately before presenting the evidence in court, giving them an opportunity to reconsider their position voluntarily. I drove to their house on a Saturday morning, bringing copies of the bank records and employment documentation. Mom answered the door with obvious discomfort, leading me to the living room where Dad sat reading the newspaper. The conversation began awkwardly, with both parents maintaining their belief in Sarah's story despite the evidence I presented. They insisted that my ability to save $30,000 still seemed suspicious, regardless of what documents might show. The emotional breakthrough came when I showed them the bank records revealing their monthly payments to Sarah. Mom's face crumpled as she realized how much money they had been providing without acknowledging it to themselves or others. Dad calculated that their support had totaled over $40,000 during the past 2.5 years. Their defensive explanations revealed a complex web of rationalization and denial. Sarah had convinced them that her artistic career just needed time to develop, that the monthly support was temporary assistance rather than long-term dependency. She had also suggested that I was earning significantly more money than I actually made, making their support of her seem like an effort to balance things fairly between their children. Mom broke down completely when she realized how their support had affected their own financial security. They had been borrowing against their home's equity to fund the monthly transfers to Sarah, accumulating debt that threatened their retirement plans. The house they had owned free and clear for 15 years now carried a mortgage balance of over $60,000. Dad's revelation proved even more devastating. He showed me loan documents that revealed the true scope of their financial distress. Not only had they taken a home equity loan to support Sarah, but they had also borrowed against his credit union retirement account and accumulated significant credit card debt. Their total obligations exceeded $100,000. The motivation behind the lawsuit suddenly became clear. My parents weren't just questioning my financial honesty. They were facing potential financial ruin due to their support of Sarah. The $30,000 they hoped to recover from me represented a life preserver for their drowning finances. Yet even facing this evidence, they struggled to accept Sarah's role in creating their crisis. Mom insisted that Sarah hadn't asked for most of the money they had provided, that they had offered it freely out of parental concern. Dad maintained that Sarah's artistic talents justified their investment, even though her career had produced minimal income over several years. Michael's investigation took a darker turn when he discovered additional financial irregularities. Credit monitoring services revealed that new accounts had been opened in my parents' names within the past 6 months, accounts they knew nothing about. Someone had been using their personal information to obtain credit cards and small loans, accumulating debt that would eventually appear on their credit reports. The forged documents in these new accounts bore signatures that resembled my father's handwriting, but showed subtle differences that suggested forgery. A handwriting analyst confirmed that the signatures had been created by someone familiar with Dad's normal signature but attempting to disguise their own handwriting style. Most disturbing was the discovery that paperwork for a significant personal loan had been submitted using my parents' information just 2 weeks before they filed their lawsuit against me. The loan application claimed my father was seeking $50,000 for home improvements, but neither parent had any knowledge of this application or any intention to borrow additional money. These revelations forced me to confront a possibility I had been avoiding. Sarah wasn't just manipulating our parents emotionally, but potentially committing financial crimes that could destroy their future security. The lawsuit against me might have been orchestrated not just to recover money she claimed to deserve, but to distract from her own illegal activities. Michael advised that we were now dealing with potential criminal matters that extended beyond our civil dispute. Elder financial abuse carried serious legal consequences, and the forged loan applications constituted felony fraud. Our family disagreement had evolved into something that could result in criminal charges and permanent damage to relationships. The evidence we had gathered painted a picture of systematic deception spanning several years. Sarah had created a fantasy narrative about grandmother Dorothy's inheritance promise, manipulated our parents into providing extensive financial support, and potentially committed identity theft to access additional funds. The $30,000 claim against me served as a smokescreen for much larger financial crimes. As I drove home from my parents' house that evening, I felt the weight of decisions that would determine our family's future. Pursuing the truth would likely result in criminal charges against Sarah and financial devastation for my parents. Allowing the lies to continue might protect family relationships in the short term, but would enable continued exploitation that could destroy my parents' retirement security. Michael's legal discovery process unveiled financial records that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of Sarah's lifestyle and spending patterns. Bank statements revealed monthly expenditures that exceeded $4,000, nearly triple her reported gallery income. The money was being spent on designer boutiques, high-end restaurants, and weekend trips to Chicago and New York that she had never mentioned to the family. Most revealing were the credit card statements that showed a troubling pattern of cash advances and money transfers. Sarah had been withdrawing large amounts of cash regularly, often $500 to $1,000 at a time, with no clear documentation of how this money was being used. The cash withdrawals totaled over $20,000 during the past year alone. Through social media investigation, Michael's team discovered that Sarah had been portraying herself very differently to her friend group than she had to our family. Instagram posts showed expensive dinners, designer handbags, and luxury hotel stays that contradicted her claims of financial struggle. Her online presence suggested someone living comfortably rather than someone requiring parental support to meet basic needs. Interviews with Sarah's co-workers at the art gallery revealed additional inconsistencies. According to the gallery manager, Sarah had been frequently absent from work, often calling in sick on Mondays and Fridays to create long weekends. Her part-time schedule had been reduced even further due to reliability issues, making her reported income even less than what she had claimed to the court. More troubling were the co-workers' descriptions of Sarah's financial discussions. She had told colleagues that she came from a wealthy family and was expecting a substantial inheritance from her grandmother. Several people remembered her mentioning specific amounts and timelines that matched her court testimony, suggesting she had been developing this story for months or possibly years. The investigation also revealed Sarah's gambling activities, which explained the mysterious cash withdrawals. Security footage from 3 different casinos showed her as a regular visitor, often spending entire evenings at poker tables and slot machines. Casino records, obtained through legal subpoena, documented losses totaling over $30,000 during the past 18 months. Michael's revelation about Sarah's gambling addiction provided crucial context for understanding her financial manipulation of our parents. The monthly $1,500 transfers they had been providing weren't supporting her living expenses. They were funding her gambling habit. The luxury apartment and expensive lifestyle were being maintained through accumulated debt that would eventually require larger amounts of money to sustain. Examining the timeline more carefully, Sarah's gambling losses had accelerated significantly after Dorothy's death 3 years ago. What had started as occasional casino visits had evolved into a serious addiction that required increasing amounts of money to maintain. The inheritance story she had created wasn't just about greed, it was about desperation to continue funding her gambling without revealing the addiction to our family. Michael scheduled interviews with staff members from the nursing home where Dorothy had spent her final months. These conversations provided a completely different picture of Dorothy's final year than what Sarah had described in court. According to multiple staff members, Dorothy rarely received visitors other than me during her weekly Sunday visits. The nursing home visitation logs confirmed that Sarah had visited Dorothy only twice during the final year of her life, both times accompanied by our parents during holiday periods. There was no record of any private conversations between Sarah and Dorothy, nor any mention of inheritance discussions in Dorothy's medical or social service records. More importantly, the nursing home staff remembered Dorothy's cognitive condition during her final months. She had been suffering from progressing dementia that affected her short-term memory and decision-making abilities. The staff psychologist noted that Dorothy often confused family members and sometimes believed she was still living in her childhood home from 70 years earlier. These medical records directly contradicted Sarah's testimony about Dorothy making clear promises regarding inheritance money. A person suffering from dementia would not have been capable of making rational financial decisions or remembering specific commitments from one conversation to the next. Michael's handwriting expert provided the most damning evidence regarding the alleged note from Dorothy. Laboratory analysis revealed that the paper was manufactured within the past year, making it impossible for Dorothy to have written it 3 years ago. The ink analysis showed characteristics consistent with a common ballpoint pen rather than the felt-tip markers that Dorothy had been forced to use due to arthritis in her hands. The handwriting analysis proved even more conclusive. While the note appeared to be written in shaky, elderly handwriting, the underlying letter formations matched Sarah's natural writing style. She had apparently attempted to disguise her handwriting by using her non-dominant hand and adding artificial tremors, but the basic letter shapes and spacing patterns remained consistent with her normal writing. Most disturbing was the psychological evaluation that Michael had arranged through the court system. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, a specialist in family financial abuse cases, identified patterns in Sarah's behavior that suggested sophisticated manipulation tactics rather than simple greed or desperation. According to Dr. Reynolds, Sarah had systematically isolated our parents from objective financial advice while positioning herself as their protector and advocate. She had created emotional scenarios that played on their parental instincts and their fear of being seen as unfair to either child. The inheritance story served multiple purposes. It explained her financial needs, justified their support, and created a villain narrative that displaced any blame from herself. Dr. Reynolds noted that this type of manipulation often escalates over time as the financial demands increase and the victim's resources become depleted. The lawsuit against me represented a new phase where Sarah was attempting to access assets outside our parents' direct control, suggesting her current sources of funding were becoming inadequate for her needs. The psychological evaluation also revealed that Sarah had likely convinced herself that the inheritance story was true on some level. Gambling addicts often develop elaborate rationalization systems that allow them to justify their behavior and maintain their self-image as victims rather than perpetrators. Sarah might genuinely believe that she deserved money from Dorothy's estate, even while knowing she had fabricated the specific promise. Michael presented me with evidence that Sarah's manipulation extended beyond our immediate family. Credit reports revealed that she had applied for loans using character references from people who believed her inheritance story. She had apparently been shopping for potential sources of money while building credibility through the lawsuit against me. Most shocking was the discovery that Sarah had contacted an elder care attorney about having our parents declared financially incompetent so she could assume legal guardianship over their assets. The attorney had declined to pursue this avenue after an initial consultation, but the mere attempt revealed the extent of Sarah's planning and manipulation. The evidence created an undeniable pattern of systematic financial abuse that had been developing over several years. Sarah hadn't simply made a mistake or acted impulsively. She had created an elaborate scheme designed to extract money from our parents while positioning herself as their advocate and protector. Michael warned me that presenting this evidence would likely destroy any possibility of maintaining family relationships with Sarah while potentially exposing her to serious criminal charges. Elder financial abuse carried penalties including substantial prison sentences, particularly when combined with fraud and identity theft charges. I faced a decision that would determine not just the outcome of our lawsuit, but the future of our entire family structure. Protecting the truth meant accepting that Sarah would likely face criminal prosecution and potential imprisonment. Allowing her manipulation to continue meant enabling the destruction of our parents' financial security and possibly their health and safety. Michael's legal strategy meeting took place on a gray Thursday morning that reflected my mood perfectly. His conference room overlooked the Detroit skyline, but I found myself staring at the documents spread across the mahogany table rather than the view. The evidence against Sarah was overwhelming, but pursuing it would require crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. The elder financial abuse statutes were clear and comprehensive. Michigan law defined financial abuse as any action taken to illegally or improperly use an older person's resources for monetary or personal benefit. Sarah's systematic exploitation of our parents met every criteria, and the penalties included both civil restitution and criminal prosecution that could result in up to 10 years imprisonment. Michael outlined our options with characteristic precision. We could file counterclaims for fraud, defamation, and elder abuse that would shift the legal burden to Sarah and potentially recover all the money she had obtained from our parents. Alternatively, we could present our evidence defensively, focusing on proving my innocence without actively pursuing charges against Sarah. The decision point centered on Sarah's recent power of attorney documents, which Michael had discovered through his investigation. 2 weeks before filing the lawsuit against me, Sarah had convinced our parents to sign papers giving her authority over their financial decisions. The documents claimed this was necessary to protect them from my aggressive behavior and potential financial exploitation. Michael's forensic accountant had traced the timeline carefully. Sarah had obtained the power of attorney immediately after learning about my house purchase, suggesting the entire lawsuit had been orchestrated to position her as our parents' protector while gaining legal control over their remaining assets. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. Under the power of attorney authority, Sarah now had legal access to our parents' bank accounts, investment portfolios, and the ability to make major financial decisions without their explicit consent. She could potentially sell their house, liquidate their retirement savings, or take additional loans against their assets, all while claiming to act in their best interests. The scope of potential exploitation was staggering. Our parents' remaining home equity, retirement accounts, and Social Security benefits represented over $400,000 in total assets. Sarah's gambling addiction and expensive lifestyle could consume this entire amount within a few years, leaving our parents destitute and potentially homeless. Michael presented character witness strategies that would demonstrate my integrity while highlighting the inconsistencies in Sarah's story. My supervisor at Ford agreed to testify about my work ethic and the overtime hours I had logged to save money for my house. College professors remembered my dedication to academic achievement despite working multiple jobs. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who had sold me the house, proved particularly valuable as a witness. She remembered my respectful behavior during negotiations and my obvious pride in becoming a homeowner. Her testimony would counter any suggestion that I was capable of exploiting elderly people for financial gain. The nursing home staff from Dorothy's facility provided crucial testimony about the reality of her final months. Their detailed records showed my consistent weekly visits compared to Sarah's absence, destroying the narrative about their close relationship and alleged inheritance discussions. Michael's investigation had also uncovered Sarah's creditors, who were becoming increasingly aggressive in their collection efforts. Casino debt, credit card companies, and private lenders were all seeking payment for obligations that exceeded $50,000. Sarah was facing potential legal action from multiple sources, making her access to our parents' money not just desired but desperately necessary. The ethical dilemma kept me awake for several nights. Exposing Sarah's crimes would protect our parents from further exploitation, but it would also destroy her life through criminal prosecution. My parents would lose their daughter, possibly permanently, and would have to face the reality that they had been manipulated and betrayed by the child they were trying to protect. Michael arranged a meeting with the Adult Protective Services Division to discuss our obligations regarding elder abuse reporting. Michigan law required anyone with knowledge of financial abuse to report it to authorities, meaning we were legally obligated to expose Sarah's activities, regardless of our personal preferences about family relationships. The Adult Protective Services investigator, Janet Murphy, reviewed our evidence with growing alarm. Sarah's systematic exploitation met all criteria for severe financial abuse, and the power of attorney documents suggested the situation was escalating rapidly. Janet warned that seniors in Sarah's position often lost their entire life savings within months once the exploitation reached this level. Janet also provided sobering statistics about family financial abuse cases. In over 80% of situations, the abuse was perpetrated by adult children who rationalized their behavior as justified by future inheritance expectations or family financial obligations. The psychological manipulation Sarah had employed followed patterns that Janet recognized from hundreds of previous cases. Most disturbing was Janet's prediction about our parents' future if Sarah's exploitation continued unchecked. Elderly victims of financial abuse often experienced severe depression, health decline, and social isolation as they realized the extent of their exploitation. Many never recovered financially or emotionally from the betrayal by trusted family members. Michael presented our final legal strategy with military precision. We would file comprehensive counterclaims that documented every aspect of Sarah's financial manipulation, while requesting emergency court intervention to suspend her power of attorney pending investigation. The criminal referral to prosecutors would happen simultaneously, ensuring that Sarah couldn't destroy additional evidence or access more of our parents' money. The financial forensics would require Sarah to account for every dollar she had received from our parents over the past 3 years, plus document the legitimate uses of power of attorney authority since obtaining those documents. Given her gambling losses and expensive lifestyle, this accounting would likely reveal additional instances of financial abuse that hadn't yet been discovered. Character assassination wasn't our goal, but the evidence would inevitably paint a picture of systematic manipulation and exploitation that would be difficult for any jury to ignore. Sarah's own testimony had created legal jeopardy for perjury charges, since her statements about grandmother Dorothy contradicted documented medical records and witness testimony. Michael warned me that Sarah's response to our counterattack would likely be desperate and potentially dangerous. People facing criminal prosecution often escalated their behavior in unpredictable ways, particularly when addiction was involved. We needed to be prepared for Sarah to take drastic actions to prevent the exposure of her activities. The timeline for legal action was critical. Every day that Sarah maintained power of attorney authority increased the potential for additional financial damage to our parents. Michael recommended filing our counterclaims immediately, while requesting emergency hearings to address the most urgent issues. I authorized Michael to proceed with the full legal strategy, knowing that this decision would fundamentally alter our family dynamics forever. Sarah would face criminal prosecution that could result in imprisonment. Our parents would confront the devastating reality of their manipulation, and I would be seen as the family member who destroyed our remaining relationships. Yet the alternative was allowing Sarah to continue exploiting our parents until their resources were exhausted and their future security destroyed. Protecting the truth meant accepting responsibility for consequences that extended far beyond winning or losing a lawsuit about my house purchase. The Hamilton County Courthouse felt different as I climbed the steps for our final hearing 3 weeks later. Media attention had begun following our case after Michael filed our counterclaims, with local newspapers reporting on family financial abuse cases as part of a broader investigative series. The spotlight added pressure that none of us had anticipated when this journey began. Courtroom C was packed beyond its normal capacity, with family members, social workers, and law students observing proceedings that had evolved from a simple property dispute into a complex case involving elder abuse, gambling addiction, and family manipulation. Judge Foster had requested additional security due to the emotional nature of the testimony expected. Sarah appeared visibly different than she had during our first hearing. The confident composure she had projected earlier was replaced by obvious anxiety and defensive body language. Her attorney, Patricia Williams, looked equally uncomfortable as she prepared to address evidence that had fundamentally undermined their original position. Michael began our presentation methodically, walking the court through Sarah's financial records with the precision of a prosecutor building a criminal case. The bank statements showing her excessive spending, the casino records documenting her gambling losses, and the credit reports revealing her mounting debts created an undeniable pattern of financial irresponsibility and deception. The handwriting analysis of Dorothy's alleged note proved devastating. Dr. James Morrison, a forensic document examiner, explained to the court how the paper dating, ink analysis, and letter formation patterns all pointed to recent forgery using disguised handwriting. He displayed enlarged photographs showing the telltale signs that the note had been written by Sarah rather than our grandmother. Perhaps most compelling was the nursing home testimony from staff members who had cared for Dorothy during her final months. Nurse supervisor Linda Hayes described Dorothy's cognitive decline and the impossibility of her making coherent financial promises during the time frame Sarah had claimed. The visitation logs showing Sarah's absence during most of Dorothy's final year contradicted her claims about their close relationship. Dr. Patricia Reynolds provided expert testimony about financial abuse patterns that helped the court understand Sarah's psychological manipulation of our parents. She explained how gambling addiction often led to elaborate rationalization systems and how Sarah's behavior followed predictable patterns seen in similar cases. The power of attorney documents became a central focus when Michael presented evidence showing how Sarah had obtained them through misrepresentation. She had convinced our parents that I was planning to exploit them financially, creating fear and paranoia that justified giving her legal control over their assets. Michael called our father as a witness, a moment I had been dreading since our legal strategy developed. Dad took the stand with obvious reluctance, his face showing the strain of confronting realities he had been avoiding for years. Under oath, he was forced to acknowledge the extent of financial support they had provided Sarah and the mounting debt this support had created. Dad's testimony became increasingly emotional as he described Sarah's manipulation tactics. She had played on their parental guilt and their desire to treat both children fairly, convincing them that my engineering career meant I needed less support than her struggling artistic pursuits. The monthly payments had started small but increased steadily as Sarah presented new financial emergencies that required immediate assistance. The most painful moment came when Michael presented Dad with evidence of the forged loan applications submitted in his name. Seeing his signature reproduced without his knowledge or consent broke something in my father's demeanor. He began to understand not just the scope of Sarah's deception, but the potential legal consequences he might face if the fraud had succeeded. Mom's testimony provided additional context about Sarah's psychological manipulation. Sarah had consistently portrayed herself as the family mediator, someone who understood both her parents' concerns and my apparent selfishness. She had positioned herself as their advocate and protector, while gradually isolating them from independent financial advice. Patricia Williams attempted damage control during her cross-examination, focusing on Sarah's mental health struggles and gambling addiction as mitigating factors rather than criminal behavior. She argued that Sarah's actions stemmed from desperation and illness rather than malicious intent to defraud family members. However, the evidence of systematic planning and deliberate deception undermined arguments about impulsive behavior driven by addiction. The forged documents, the power of attorney manipulation, and the elaborate inheritance story demonstrated sophisticated criminal activity that extended beyond simple gambling-related financial problems. Sarah's own testimony became the most dramatic moment of the entire proceedings. As Patricia Williams questioned her about the inheritance promise, Sarah's story began falling apart under scrutiny. She couldn't explain specific details about the alleged conversation with Dorothy, and her answers became increasingly inconsistent when pressed for timeline clarification. The confrontation about the forged note triggered an emotional breakdown that revealed the depth of Sarah's self-deception. She alternated between admitting the forgery and insisting that Dorothy really had made promises about inheritance money. Her testimony suggested that she might have convinced herself that the lies were true on some psychological level. Under cross-examination by Michael, Sarah's defensive responses became increasingly desperate. When confronted with evidence of her gambling activities, she initially denied the extent of her losses before finally admitting to having occasional problems with casino visits. The minimization continued even when faced with documentation of over $30,000 in gambling losses. The most devastating moment came when Michael presented evidence of Sarah's plan to sell our parents' house and move them to a smaller apartment. Documents recovered from her apartment showed research into senior living facilities and real estate valuations that suggested she had been planning to liquidate their primary asset for her own use. Sarah's reaction to this revelation provided the breakthrough that clarified her true motivations. She broke down completely, screaming that our parents were too old to manage their own money and that she was protecting them from making mistakes. The mask of concern for family welfare finally slipped, revealing the controlling manipulation that had driven her behavior. Judge Foster called for a brief recess as Sarah's emotional outburst required intervention from court security. When proceedings resumed, Patricia Williams requested permission to withdraw from the case, citing irreconcilable differences with her client. Sarah would have to represent herself for the remainder of the hearing or request a continuance to find new legal representation. Sarah chose to continue without an attorney, delivering a rambling closing statement that alternated between self-pity and accusations against me for destroying the family. She insisted that she had been trying to protect our parents from my manipulation while pursuing money that rightfully belonged to her from Dorothy's estate. Michael's closing argument focused on the overwhelming evidence of financial abuse and the immediate need to protect our parents from further exploitation. He requested not only dismissal of the original lawsuit against me, but also emergency intervention to revoke Sarah's power of attorney and refer the matter to prosecutors for criminal investigation. Judge Foster's preliminary ruling addressed the immediate issues while reserving final judgment pending additional investigation. She dismissed the lawsuit against me completely, finding no evidence to support claims that I had improperly obtained my house down payment. She also suspended Sarah's power of attorney authority, pending a full investigation into her use of those powers. Most significantly, Judge Foster ordered immediate referral to the prosecutor's office for investigation of potential criminal charges related to elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. She also directed Adult Protective Services to conduct emergency evaluation of our parents' safety and financial security. The courtroom cleared slowly as the implications of the judge's ruling became apparent. Sarah faced potential criminal prosecution that could result in significant prison time. Our parents would need extensive support to recover from their financial losses and psychological manipulation. I had won the legal battle about my house, but our family relationships would require years to heal if they could be repaired at all. 6 months later, I stood in the same courthouse where our family drama had unfolded, but this time as a witness in Sarah's criminal trial. The prosecutor had filed charges for elder financial abuse, fraud, and forgery based on the evidence uncovered during our civil case. Sarah had ultimately accepted a plea agreement that would require restitution to our parents and 3 years of supervised probation rather than prison time. The financial restitution amounted to over $80,000, representing the documented money Sarah had obtained from our parents plus interest and penalties. Since Sarah had no assets or income sufficient to pay this amount immediately, the court established a payment plan that would extend for several years and require her to maintain steady employment. More importantly, the plea agreement included provisions for mandatory gambling addiction treatment and financial counseling. Sarah would be prohibited from accessing any casino properties, online gambling sites, or other gaming facilities during her probation period. Violation of these terms would result in immediate imprisonment for the original charges. My parents' financial recovery proved more complex than the legal resolution. Their home equity had been depleted to approximately $15,000, and their retirement savings had been reduced by 40% due to early withdrawals used to support Sarah. However, the court's intervention had prevented complete financial devastation that likely would have occurred if Sarah's exploitation had continued. Michael helped arrange financial counseling services that enabled my parents to restructure their remaining debts and develop sustainable budgets for their retirement years. They qualified for reverse mortgage programs that would allow them to remain in their home while accessing needed income. The process was emotionally difficult but financially viable. Perhaps most challenging was rebuilding family relationships after the extensive manipulation and betrayal had been exposed. My parents struggled with guilt about believing Sarah's lies while questioning my integrity. They also faced embarrassment about their gullibility and anger about the years of financial support that had been wasted on gambling addiction. Family counseling sessions, initially court-mandated but later voluntary, provided structured opportunities to address these complex emotions. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, the same expert who had testified about financial abuse patterns, helped facilitate discussions about trust, manipulation, and family dynamics that had enabled Sarah's exploitation to continue for so long. The counseling revealed how Sarah had systematically isolated our parents from outside perspectives that might have questioned her stories. She had portrayed herself as their advocate against external threats, while gradually increasing their emotional and financial dependence on her guidance. The psychological manipulation had been as damaging as the financial abuse. Rebuilding my relationship with Mom and Dad required patience and understanding from all parties. They needed time to process their feelings about being deceived by Sarah, while also acknowledging their unfair suspicions about my integrity. I had to accept that their trust in Sarah hadn't necessarily reflected lack of faith in me, but rather successful manipulation by someone they were trying to protect. The house on Maple Street became a symbol of healing rather than division. I began hosting Sunday dinners there, recreating the family traditions that had been disrupted by years of conflict and manipulation. Mom slowly regained confidence in kitchen activities she had enjoyed, before stress about Sarah consumed her emotional energy. Dad's recovery involved returning to activities and interests that had been abandoned during the financial crisis created by supporting Sarah. He resumed woodworking projects in my basement workshop and began sharing stories about his own career and experiences that reminded us of who he was beyond Sarah's manipulation. Sarah's absence from family gatherings created mixed emotions for all of us. Her criminal behavior had made continued relationships impossible in the short term, but we mourned the loss of who she might have been without addiction and manipulation. The daughter and sister we remembered from earlier years had been real, even if recent years had revealed darker aspects of her personality. Victim advocates from Adult Protective Services helped our parents understand that financial abuse often involves family members who manipulate parental love and protective instincts. They weren't unusual or particularly gullible. They had been targeted by someone who understood their psychological vulnerabilities and exploited them systematically. The broader investigation into Sarah's activities revealed additional victims beyond our immediate family. She had obtained money from elderly acquaintances using similar inheritance stories and had manipulated romantic relationships to access credit cards and loans. The prosecutor estimated that her total fraudulent activities exceeded $150,000 over 4 years. Understanding Sarah's pattern of manipulation helped our parents realize that they hadn't been singled out for exploitation due to any particular weakness. Sarah had developed sophisticated techniques for identifying and targeting vulnerable people, using different stories and approaches depending on what would be most effective with each victim. Recovery for our parents involved not just financial counseling but also education about recognizing manipulation tactics that might be used by others in the future. They learned about common scams targeting seniors and developed strategies for making important decisions independently rather than relying on family members who might have conflicts of interest. My own healing process required accepting that family relationships can be complex and that love doesn't always prevent people from making harmful choices. Sarah's gambling addiction and manipulation didn't erase positive memories from our childhood, but they did require acknowledgement that the person I thought I knew had been capable of serious criminal behavior. The experience taught valuable lessons about financial boundaries within families and the importance of maintaining independent perspectives on important decisions. My parents learned to seek advice from multiple sources before making major financial commitments, while I became more aware of subtle signs that might indicate manipulation or exploitation. 18 months after our court case concluded, Sarah completed her gambling addiction treatment program and began the long process of paying restitution to our parents. She wrote letters of apology that acknowledged the damage her behavior had caused and expressed genuine remorse for the manipulation and betrayal. Whether Sarah's recovery will be permanent remains uncertain, but her letters suggest understanding of how addiction and desperation led to criminal behavior that devastated family relationships. She has maintained steady employment and has been meeting her restitution obligations according to court requirements. My parents have cautiously expressed willingness to consider limited contact with Sarah in the future, contingent on her continued recovery and demonstration of trustworthy behavior over an extended period. Rebuilding that relationship will require years of consistent actions rather than words or promises. The house on Maple Street continues to represent achievement and independence that no family conflict can diminish. I've made improvements to the kitchen and finished the basement workshop where Dad and I spend time working on projects that strengthen our renewed relationship. Most importantly, our family learned that protecting people sometimes requires confronting them with difficult truths rather than enabling destructive behavior. Supporting Sarah's addiction and manipulation hadn't helped her or protected our parents. It had enabled greater damage that required legal intervention to stop. The experience reinforced my belief in the importance of truth, even when it creates short-term pain or conflict. Honest relationships require courage to address problems directly rather than avoiding confrontation that might preserve temporary harmony while allowing underlying issues to worsen. 3 years later, our family still bears scars from Sarah's manipulation and our legal battles, but we've also developed stronger foundations based on honesty and realistic assessment of each other's strengths and weaknesses. The crisis forced us to examine relationship patterns and communication styles that needed improvement regardless of Sarah's criminal behavior. I invite you to share your thoughts about family financial boundaries and how to protect elderly relatives from exploitation. Have you encountered similar situations where addiction or desperation led family members to make harmful choices? How did your family address conflicts between supporting loved ones and enabling destructive behavior? Please take a moment to like this video if it helped you understand the complexities of family financial abuse, and subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming personal and family challenges. Share this story with others who might benefit from understanding how manipulation can develop gradually within families, and how legal intervention sometimes becomes necessary to protect vulnerable people. Thank you for listening to my story about fighting for truth and justice within my own family. I hope it provides insight into the difficult decisions required when love alone isn't sufficient to protect people from exploitation and harm. Sometimes the most loving action is the one that feels most difficult in the moment, but provides the foundation for genuine healing and recovery in the future.